The Fed has injected over $100 trillion in liquidity and credit into this system in 15 years. The dollar has lost over 95% of its purchasing power since 1913. Everyone keeps asking, when does it collapse? Wrong question. The real question is, what's their plan B when the old rail finally breaks? Because XRP is not some random altcoin that accidentally survived. It sits exactly where a new rail would need to sit, between central banks, and global payment pipes. You're not scared of volatility. You're scared of being on the wrong side of a quiet transition. So here's the problem. What if the Fed's plan B is already wired and you're only seeing the price chart, not the blueprint? The dollar isn't stable. It's managed to decline wearing a suit. U.S. national debt has blown past $35 trillion. Debt to GDP is around 124%, the highest since World War II. Interest alone runs near $1 trillion a year, more than the defense budget. That's not a currency. That's a liability spiral. During the pandemic, the Fed expanded its balance sheet by roughly $9 trillion, and inflation answered with about 8% in 2022. The worst in 40 years. Transitory turned into persistent and then got rebranded as normal. Meanwhile, foreign confidence is leaking. China cut its $25.7 billion U.S. Treasury in July 2025. BRICS are wiring alternative rails. Saudi Arabia is flirting with yuan for oil. Historically, reserve currencies last 80 to 100 years. The dollar has ruled for about 80. From Bretton Woods in 1944 through the Nixon shock in 1971 to now. You don't need conspiracy. The math is loud enough. This isn't a theory. It's your rent, your food, your time. Every rescue package quietly transfers purchasing power from your future into their present. So the question isn't, will the dollar die tomorrow? It's, when the old rail finally breaks, what system have they already prepared to catch the fall? You don't rebuild the core of money by accident. You do it through papers and consultations. In January 2022, the Fed released its Money and Payments Report, openly exploring a US CBDC and inviting comments. Over 2,000 responses came in, including a detailed submission from Ripple. Read between the lines and the spec sheet appears. Throughput in the thousands of TPS, settlement in seconds, interoperability with other CBDCs and legacy rails, and controlled decentralization, not a free-for-all casino. Now compare that to today's rails. FedNow handles real-time domestic payments, but isn't a full cross-border backbone. SWIFT is slow and opaque. Bitcoin is too sluggish and uncontrollable for central banks. Ethereum is volatile with unpredictable fees. There's a clear gap. They need speed, finality, interoperability, and compliance in one stack. Ripple has already put technology and documentation on their desk. The Fed doesn't need to build from zero. It just needs to choose. Retail stares at price charts and memes. The Fed stares at latency, throughput, and systemic risk. Different battlefield, different time horizon. So if the requirements are already written, which existing ledger quietly fits the checklist and is already in the Fed's inbox? Retail stares at price charts and memes. The Fed stares at latency, throughput, and systemic risk. Different battlefield, different time horizon. So if the requirements are already written, which existing ledger quietly fits the checklist and is already in the Fed's inbox? This isn't. Maybe someone at the Fed heard of XRP. Ripple left a trail. The ledger isn't a prototype. Around 1,500 to 3,400 TPS, 3 to 5 second settlement, near zero fees, minimal energy use, and 70 plus million transactions processed. RippleNet connects 300 plus institutions. Bank of America cites Ripple Tech in patents. SBI in Japan runs joint ventures. The Bank of England has consulted Ripple on CBDC design, and the legal wall fell in August 2025. XRP in secondary markets was ruled not security, with Ripple paying $125 million to settle. Add Garlinghouse at Davos and Ripple's lobbying footprint, and the picture is clear. They didn't wander in by chance. They pushed their way to the table. You can dismiss XRP as a banker coin. The people who actually run the pipes don't care about your insult. They care about rails that clear, comply, and don't break. So if you were forced to pick a US-aligned global settlement layer under time pressure, what else, realistically, would you choose that already sits this close to the system? While the rails debate plays out, another infrastructure story is moving behind the scenes. Let me introduce Unich, the platform that's changing the game in crypto trading. Unich's OTC exchange has already processed over $1.3 billion in OTC trading volume, giving both buyers and sellers the flexibility they need. With over 5.5 million active users and 500,000 plus followers on X, it's a platform built for scale. Please note that this is not financial advice. The Fed isn't moving in a vacuum. It's moving with a knife at its back called geopolitics. China's digital yuan, ECNY, has been live since around 2020, rolled out in 25 plus cities with roughly 260 million wallets by 2024. It's already running cross-border pilots with Thailand, the UAE, and Hong Kong. The goal is obvious: settle trade without asking Washington for permission. Globally, more than 130 countries, covering about 98% of world GDP, are exploring CBDCs, and dozens are already piloting or launching. The ECB is targeting a digital euro window around 2026 to 2028. At the same time, SWIFT has been weaponized, most visibly in the 2022 sanctions on Russia, pushing countries to explore alternatives like China's CIPS and projects such as mBridge for multi-CBDC settlements. Every successful test is one less reason to route value through the dollar. If the US drags its feet on a credible digital strategy, it hands first-mover advantage to its rivals and lets them define the new standard for cross-border money. Monetary dominance doesn't end with a single headline. It ends when big players quietly realize they can clear value on other rails and start doing it. So the Fed doesn't really get to choose between change and no change. It only chooses whether the next rail is built under US influence or under someone else's. Timing is never clean, but pressure carves out windows. By 2025, the SEC's war with Ripple is finished, and XRP finally has legal clarity in US secondary markets. A more crypto-friendly administration steps in, Garrett Gensler exits, and the SEC shifts from crusading to negotiating. But macro pressure is the real accelerant. Since 2024, the decline has moderated to 3.2% annually. However, the dollar did experience an 11% devaluation against a basket of major currencies in the first half of 2025, which is significant. Or one more bank failure, like SVB, could give Washington the perfect justification for a strategic modernization of money. Fed research cycles run 2 to 3 years, meaning a 2022 CBDC consultation logically opens decision zones around 2025. Overlay that with a 2025 to 2028 political window and the global CBDC race intensifying by 2026 to 2027, and the activation band practically draws itself. You won't get a polite email saying, "We're about to flip the rail, please position accordingly." By the time the announcement hits CNBC, smart money will already be seated. So the only real unknown isn't if they move to Plan B. It's when they decide the pain is high enough to justify it. Quick update on Unich. Their IDO for the $UN token is live. The project markets a low FDV approach, referral rewards, and NFT perks for early participants. They present themselves as an on-chain OTC liquidity layer, aiming to capture pre-market and institutional flows. Again, not financial advice. Check the link in the description for Unich's token page and white paper before deciding. In the end, monetary revolutions don't announce themselves. They don't trend on X. They slip in through policy memos, settlement trials, and quiet partnerships, long before the public realizes the rails have already shifted beneath their feet. Maybe XRP becomes part of the new backbone. Maybe it doesn't. But the real mistake is thinking the future will wait for retail to catch up. It won't. The Fed, the banks, the geopolitical players, they're not debating ideology. They're preparing options. And when the moment hits, they'll move fast, without warning, and without asking for permission. So hit subscribe to WealthyWise. Leave your take in the comments. Not for engagement, but because your perspective tells me which side of the transition you're standing on.